Do the cards know? Here's a quick thought experiment. If I handed you a deck of cards and said, guess the symbol on the next card without looking, how confident would you feel? And be honest, because statistically speaking, you should not feel confident at all. Today we're talking about Zener cards, the science behind ESP testing. Why a score over 50% accuracy makes science uncomfortable, and why intelligence agencies quietly paid attention even if they publicly rolled their eyes. We'll start simple. Zener cards, also they're called ESP cards, and they were developed in the 1930s by psychologist Carl Zener. Later they were popularized by Dr. J.B. Rhine at Duke University. The deck of cards is extremely basic. They have a circle, a plus sign, 3 wavy lines, a square, and a star. There are 5 symbols. Each symbol appears 5 times. There are 25 cards total. No tricks, no extra hidden meanings, and no surprise symbol. The idea was to strip guessing down to pure probability. Here's where math steps in. If there are 5 symbols, and you're guessing randomly, your odds of being right are 1 in 5. That's 20% accuracy. So in a full 25 card deck, you'd expect to guess about 5 cards correctly. And I'm not being pessimistic. This is the actual math. Most people land right there, right in the 20% accuracy range. Some dip a little lower, some might spike slightly higher. And then there are outliers, I guess we'll call them. So let's look at about 60% accuracy. That means 15 correct guesses out of the 25 cards. So that's not pretty good. That's not lucky. That's 3 times better than chance. From a statistical standpoint, anything above 30 to 35% already raises eyebrows. 50 to 60% under controlled conditions is considered exceptional. And repeating that performance? Well, that's when probability theory starts quietly backing out of the room. One lucky run? Sure, that can be expected. Repeated sessions at 50 to 60% or higher? That's when researchers start rerunning trials, tightening controls, and watching hands very carefully. Because at that point, randomness alone does not explain it very well. I'm sure everybody wants to know if the CIA used Zener cards. And yes, but not in the way movies make it look. Zener cards themselves were mostly used in academic research, not field intelligence. But during the Cold War, U.S. intelligence agencies became very interested in a broader question. That question was, does human perception have limits that we don't fully understand? And that curiosity led to programs like Grill Flame, Center Lane, and Stargate. These focused more on remote viewing than Zener card guessing, so describing distant locations, sealed targets, or unknown sites was more of the premise of these programs. Zener-style tests help establish probability models and screening concepts. The idea that a small subset of people consistently beat chance, well, that part stuck. While still remaining grounded in research and science, here's where things get a little interesting. People who showed above chance performance often shared a few traits, like strong focus, emotional calm, and regular meditation or mindful practices. It was not hype, not mystical rituals, just quiet, sustained attention. Ironically, excitement and ego tended to make performance worse. So if someone thought during the test, oh wow, I'm psychic, their scores often dropped immediately. Apparently, the brain prefers not to be bragged about. We'll lean a little further into the mystery about people who repeatedly score 50 to 60%. Hypothetically, of course. Science doesn't officially call them psychic, but it also doesn't dismiss them outright. The possible explanations include extremely refined subconscious pattern recognition, heightened sensitivity to subtle cues, and unusually strong signal-to-noise ratio in perception. Or, and this is where the question remains open, it's a form of cognition that we don't fully understand yet. So not necessarily supernatural, just unexplained and not understood yet. And that's often where science begins. Zener cards aren't magic, they are math. And most people land exactly where probability says they should. But every so often, someone doesn't. And whether you call it intuition, anomalous cognition, or the brain quietly doing something extraordinary behind the scenes, those results still make researchers pause. And that's because when chance keeps losing the same game, you start wondering who's really holding the deck. It's going to get a little stranger. So up till now, we've been talking about guessing cards that no one can see, the Zener cards. But researchers didn't stop there. They asked a more unsettling question. What if someone else can see the card, and you still get it right? And this is where telepathy testing enters the picture. It's a classic setup. One person, called the sender, looks at a Zener card. Another person, the receiver, sits in a separate room. There are no mirrors, no reflections, and no shared air vents carrying secret symbol-shaped whispers. The receiver simply tries to identify which symbol the sender is looking at. And again, chance expectation is still 20%. Most people perform exactly as you'd expect. But occasionally, and this is the part researchers documented very carefully, some pairs performed consistently above chance. Not dramatically, and not every time, but enough to be statistically meaningful. And what's weird is often it wasn't just the individual, it was the pairing. Certain sender-receiver combinations worked better than others, which also raised an uncomfortable possibility. What if the signal isn't just in the mind, but in the connection? This makes scientists nervous, because if information can transfer without sensory input, that breaks a rule. Not a small rule, a foundational one. So researchers tightened controls, swapped partners, blinded protocols, and still, in a small number of cases, the effects persisted. Not strong enough to declare a revolution, but not weak enough to dismiss completely, which is arguably the most frustrating result science can get. And now we're going to jump from cards to coordinates, because this is where the leap happened. Researchers, including those later working with government-funded programs, began asking, if this isn't about symbols, what is it about? And that question led away from cards, towards targets. Instead of, is it a circle or a star, the question became, what's at this location? That shift gave rise to remote viewing. We can look at remote viewing as a branch of the same tree. Remote viewing is often misunderstood. It's not fortune-telling. It's not astral travel. It's structured perception under blind conditions. Viewers are given coordinates, a sealed target ID, or a location they've never seen, and then they're asked to describe shapes, textures, layouts, activity. So not interpretations, just impressions. And very interestingly, this mirrors what high-performing Zener subjects reported. They weren't seeing symbols. They were sensing impressions and translating them afterwards. That's a key detail. Across card tests, telepathy experiments, and remote viewing trials, the same pattern emerges. Results are inconsistent, effects are subtle, pressure degrades performance, and calm focus improves it. And most importantly, a small number of people outperform chance repeatedly, not perfectly, not dramatically, but again, reliably enough to be noticed. This brings us to a hypothetical question that science can't quite shake, and that never really goes away. And that is, what if people aren't accessing more information, but they're filtering less noise? So what if what we call psychic ability is actually heightened signal sensitivity, reduced cognitive interference, or access to subconsciousness processing that most people never notice? Or, and this is the quiet question behind closed doors, what if consciousness itself plays a role we don't fully understand yet? And this is how it got to closing the mystery without solving it. Science hasn't proven telepathy. It hasn't validated remote viewing as an operational tool. And intelligence agencies eventually stepped away from these programs, publicly. But they didn't step away because nothing happened. They stepped away because what did happen could not be made reliable. And that may be the most honest conclusion of all. Because when a phenomenon refuses to behave on command, but still shows up occasionally, it leaves us with data and questions. And maybe the reminder that the human mind is still holding a few cards face down. So let's bring this home. The noise, the mind, and what we choose to focus on. Because whether we're talking about Zener cards, telepathy experiments, or remote viewing, one theme keeps quietly showing up in the background. Noise. Not just sound, but mental noise. Cognitive science is very clear on this part. Our brain performs best in states of calm focus, emotional regulation, and clarity. When those states are disrupted, our ability to process information, consciously and subconsciously, drops. And here's the key thing. Modern life is loud. Stress, fear, anger, guilt, conflict, constant threat narratives, relentless political division. These aren't just emotional experiences. They're cognitive disruptors. Neuroscience shows that when the brain is locked into survival-based thinking, resources shift away from creativity, intuition, long-term reasoning, subtle perception, and towards threat detection, reactivity, and black and white thinking. That's useful if you're running from danger all the time. It's not useful if you're trying to access the full spectrum of your cognitive abilities. Filtering noise is not ignoring reality. This isn't about pretending bad things don't exist. It's about recognizing that constant immersion in fear, outrage, and division keeps the brain in a heightened stress state. When we can't filter out the external noise, we lose access to calm awareness, nuanced thinking, and internal signal clarity. And without those, whether you believe in psychic phenomenon or not, our best human capacities get suppressed. Before I continue any further, I'd like to clearly express that this is only my personal perspective. This is my opinion. It is grounded in cognitive science, but still only my perspective. I believe that keeping humanity locked in a constant state of emotional noise is functionally a form of control. Not control in a sci-fi sense, but control through distraction, fear, and division. When people are overwhelmed, stressed and emotionally reactive, they are easier to steer. They stay focused on hate instead of understanding, fear instead of clarity, and survival instead of growth. And science supports this. Chronic stress is one of the strongest suppressors of our higher cognitive function. What this means for human potential, whether you frame it as intuition, advanced cognition, or something more mysterious, accessing our full mental capacity requires calm, clarity, emotional regulation, intentional focus. The same conditions that improve memory, creativity, perception, and problem solving. And yes, the same conditions reported by people who consistently perform well in anomalous cognition experiments. So, for anybody interested, I propose a New Year's resolution without the pressure. So, as a New Year's resolution, nothing dramatic, it's just an experiment. Try filtering out external noise. And this does not mean disengaging from reality, not ignoring unjust, but refusing to live in constant emotional reaction. Focus on truth over outrage, clarity over chaos, and humanity over division. Living rooted in those principles naturally quiets the noise. And when the noise quiets, the mind does what it's always been capable of doing. Maybe the most radical thing we can do isn't unlocking hidden powers, but reclaiming the mental spaces we've been trained to surrender. And when humanity starts operating from clarity instead of fear, change doesn't come slowly. It comes all at once. This discussion was to explore historical research, cognitive science, as well as philosophical perspectives on human perception and focus. Any claims regarding psychic abilities still remain unproven and controversial, and no conclusion here should be made interpreted as scientific fact or medical, psychological, or political advice. The opinions expressed are personal reflections meant to encourage critical thinking, self-awareness, and healthy cognitive practices.